you for free and complain or give you accolades or whatever they want to do about your content. So we have a phone number that is published on our website and is in the yellow pages, if anybody actually still uses those, we don't know, that they can contact us. And our policy is they get a response. So if anybody emails us on our webpage email address, if anybody calls us, unless they specifically say, I don't want you calling me back, we call them back, we email them back. However they contacted us, we contact them. So anytime an email comes into the viewer services email address, it goes to me, it goes to every one of my directors, it goes to every one of my managers. And the manager that is most pertinent to that particular issue is the one who's going to answer it. But I have a gatekeeper to make sure that happens. I have one of my directors whose job it is to say, Bob, you take this one. Sally, you take that one, and to ensure that they do it. Okay, and then to see the response that they send out to the viewers so we can read that and say, yeah, this is what we wanted said to this person in a polite, respectful way. Because believe me, you get some pretty inflammatory emails and your knee-jerk reaction is to type up something snarky and send it back to them. Everybody has to take a breath. Breathe, it's not personal, they're upset, it's okay. Same thing for member services. We have a separate number for member services. Again, we treat them a little bit differently because these are people who are putting, their money where their mouth is, they're voting with their pocketbooks, and frankly, they have different needs. Generally speaking, the member services number is because somebody has donated money with an expectation of something in return and they haven't received it in the time, this DVD or that CD or whatever, and they haven't received it, or it was broken when they received it. So that's mostly what member services deals with. But again, every email, every call that comes into member service, somebody responds. Planned giving, this is a growing area for us, and this is something that we really want to encourage. So again, we have a whole process in place for planned giving requests. When somebody calls us, we have a person who is dedicated to that task, and they are not a financial planner, but they have access to a lot of resources. We do not point them to a specific financial planner to help them out, but we give them sites and places and numbers they can call to get that information to guide them in their plan giving process. And this is a growing area for us. And then corporate support, which essentially are those people who give us money to put those underwriters on the air, and that's its own set of processes, all right? Because the FCC has these very strict guidelines on what you're allowed to say and how you're allowed to say it. For instance, Bob's Bargain Barn cannot give us $5,000 for a whole set of spots that say, come on down to Bob's Saturday, we have a sale. That's a call to action. We are not allowed to do that. We cannot have a call to action. We can't say, this car is only $9.99. That is inherently a call to action. Come spend $9.99 with us. I'm thinking $9,999, right? You can't do those calls to action. So we're not allowed to do that. So there's a lot of very specific requirements about what we are allowed to say. One or two of you might be old enough to remember White Letters on a Blue Background, Mobil Corporation, right? This program brought to you in part by Mobil Corporation. There was a time when that legally was all we were allowed to do. White letters on a blue background with that kind of phrasing. Over time, the FCC loosened up a little bit and they said, it's okay if you make those things a little more interesting. So they got bored with them too, I guess. So now we're allowed to show moving video, we're allowed to show pretty scenes, we're allowed to show a car drive by, but we can't say, come on down and buy this car. We can just say, Toyota, supporting public broadcasting since 1968, with a phone number or an email address or something like that. The FCC has judged that is not a call to action, so we are allowed to do that. So there are some real restrictions that customers, clients, have to be navigated through when they want to advertise, underwrite public television programming. Then on the other side, we have a whole process in place that makes sure that when they buy that time, that spot airs when and where and in the quality that we told them that we would do it. So if they buy, the news hour, we want to make sure that every time the news hour is on, their spot is there, because that's what they paid for. So we have a traffic process that is put in place that allows us to do that. And this is the broadcast production process that takes us through the creation of this kind of content all the way through the distribution of that content. So in production, you have the thing called the technical operating specs. This is what the PBS's guidelines. Now, PBS cannot force me to follow their technical operating specs. They cannot force me to put the green gamut lower than this level and the white level at 100% and the black level at 7.5%. They can't force me to do that, but what they can say is, if you don't do that, we're certainly not going to air your program, and No other PBS station in the system is likely to air your program. So yeah, put it on your own air if you want, but we're not going to touch it. So the technical specs, again, kind of a carrot. You want to play with PBS, you play by these specs. You want to broadcast it on your own station, you can broadcast all the junk you want, but it's not going any farther than that. Well, they're really good specs. Yes, sir.
So if you do a rebroadcast, so if somebody picks up our show, you know, KNME in Tucson, like something that UNM did, or KNME, do you guys get a royalty? Is there a fee sharing?
Well, it could be. Maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on what we decided to do with it. In our particular case, generally, when we distribute a product, and I'm going to get to distribution in a little while, but when we distribute a product, we do it without any expectation of compensation. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. But the technical operating specs are really kind of that baseline of technical quality that PBS says, if you want to play with any other PBS station or with us at the national level, you need to follow these. And they're just really good. So we follow them. They're good.
If FCC is monitoring your member contributions, are they also critiquing your program to make sure you're on slant in order to support political viewpoints that perhaps a member might?
They are not monitoring us. They are relying on you to complain to them if that's the case.
Okay.
So if you have a problem with the product that you were seeing on the air along those lines. Now, there isn't anything inherently wrong as far as the FCC is concerned with bias. And that's a really tough, really hard argument to make. But if you can demonstrate a pattern of bias, yeah, the FCC is going to take you pretty seriously. But I'll tell you, that's a pretty high bar. Again, your expectations of bias, your experience of bias is differently than somebody else's. So if you can get a bunch of people who agree, you got a case.
Well, it's more the buying influence, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
This is where the public file comes in. And again, it's kind of on us. So we have a public file. We have to report when somebody gives us money for any kind of program. Now, we don't take political advertising, commercial stations, we're not allowed to do that, but we are allowed to take dollars from people to create a certain type of program. So I've got the Kellogg Foundation, which is really interested in early childhood issues, health, education, welfare of young kids. And they come to us and say, we're going to give you $200,000, and they did. This is really cool. And we want you to do programs that focus on early childhood issues. And we look at that and go, well, that is what we do. That's not the only thing we do, but that's certainly part of what we do. And yeah, but you, Kellogg, can't tell us exactly what to do. You can just say, we're going to give you this money to support that. If we don't do that, they're going to come back next year and say, you didn't do it, we're not giving you any more. As it turns out, they continue to come back year after year after year and say, yeah, you're doing what we want. This is good. We're going to continue to support us. But they cannot have editorial control over that product. So there has to be a firewall in between what the funder is doing and what we're doing. So one of those firewalls is if Kellogg Foundation gives us $200,000 to do children's programming, Kellogg Foundation can't be in the program. I had to turn down an absolutely wonderful documentary on forest fires and forest fire management done by Northern Arizona University because the executive director of the department that was funding that program was in the show. Now, he wasn't saying anything controversial, and he wasn't wrong on what he was saying. It was a really good documentary at a really timely point. It was right around the Cerro Grande fire. But I couldn't show it because the funder had appeared in the program. So that's one way we try and keep that separation of money and editorial. The FCC doesn't monitor so much as they look, and what they do is they monitor viewer feedback. As you, the viewers, give them feedback, say, ooh, their closed captioning is terrible, or I think their editorial is suspect. The FCC is monitoring that. In the case of something like editorial, they're likely to look for a pattern, so they're likely to look for many people emailing them about the same issues. Okay, something like closed captioning, which is very much a quantitative issue, I mean, you can look at it and see, they're much more likely to take pretty quickly and deal with directly. Things like signal interference, they are on top of constantly. If we're broadcasting a signal that is interfering with another broadcaster, they're going to deal with that very, very quickly.
Oh boy.
Sorry?
I said, oh boy.
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, they have the big stick. So technical operating specs is the first line of defense for production and maintaining quality. The picture of our control room. And this is one of those quantitative measuring devices we use. This is an audio measuring for 5.1 surround sound. And it basically gives you parameters that you want to keep the signal as much as possible